Hi everyone, this is a little anatomy talk through of a patch I did in a piece yesterday with the Theremin. I promised a few people I put together a little overview of the patch. It's still in its current form, so it looks like a bit of a jumble, but what I intend to do is sort of go through each sound and talk about how it's constructed. And this is also a bit of a follow-on from my overview of the whole rack, which I did last week. So you could watch that one first, then this one, in terms of constructing one type of music that you can do with this sort of system. So what I'm going to do is sort of go through each of the sound sources of this patch and talk about how it's generated from a CV, gate and modulation perspective, and then sort of talk about how the whole thing fits together. So without further ado, let's just sort of get into each sound as it appears on the audio mixer. So this is the, as I said in my previous video, this is the sort of master, not the brains, it's the matrix, the router of all the audio. So I use this when I'm creating a piece to decide what I want active at any moment. I've just while it's on, just so that it sounds sort of interesting rather than dry, I'll leave the reverb on the master here. So this is the master section, as on the previous video. I'll leave this running so that you can sort of hear nice things as opposed to dry things running through it. And just a little embellishment on this, the FX8 XL, happy nerding. And the reason I got the XL version is that I can have modulation going into the effects, and I've actually got a very slow LFO on this lead controlling the delay or decay, if you like, of this reverb. So you'll hear it sort of phasing in and out. But I'll leave that running on a lowish setting just so the sound's quite nice. So stereo pair 1 is actually coming from the surface. So that's the modeling synth from Qubit. I'll pull it up so you can, and I'll try and balance my speaking voice with this. I put this in a stereo pair because there's a nice feature in here that allows the sounds to move between the speakers rather randomly, each trigger. So what you're hearing here is it's sort of string modeling sound, one of the first models, with the decay full on, and the tone and strike, which is the sort of pulse at the beginning of the sound, is set to medium. I can deaden it slightly, and that's providing, if you like, a rather sort of plucky wash. Just to explain where the notes are coming from, and this will be the crux of the video, is how all of this is routed. I'll go through each thing in turn. So the CV, the notes, are actually coming from this Ornament and Crime Hemisphere 1 Enigma Junior, which is effectively a Turing machine, a sort of model, slightly generative model of notes. Notes that work together quite well. So that CV, which is untuned, is coming out of this lead. I know it's hard to see it, but it's coming out the bottom here into my Mosaic quantizer. I'll move the leads out of the way so you can probably see it. And this quantizer allows me to, as I've said before, change the range of notes. In this case, it's a C minor type piece. So you can see I've just got the C and the G on. Let's add the A flat. So occasionally it will hit the A flat. And it depends very much on the Turing machine going on here from this hemispheres. So that goes through the quantizer and then into the CV of the Qubit surface, creating those notes. I normally have it onto a slightly richer scale, mostly C minor with the D missing, to create a sort of pentatonic feel. The other important thing is how it's being triggered. So this is the trigger input. That's basically when the notes sound. and that's coming from PAMS. So PAMS has effectively got 8 clock outputs, a variety of different types of clocks that you can choose and set using these controls. So it's from, in this case, number, let's just get this right, yeah, number 4, which is actually on a random waveform. You can see it pulsing, and depending on, and it's quite slow, I think it's on, let's just check, 1.3 times clock, and because it's a random waveform, it will occasionally trigger and it will occasionally not, and you're not quite sure when. So that's why I use this. So it goes from there into this mult top row, and one of those goes into the trigger for the surface, which is actually providing the sound, and the other one, of course, triggers the hemispheres. We mentioned it already, the Enigma Turing machine. So that needs to also be triggered, so it steps through this sequence, which is slightly probabilistic as well. I put a level P of 16, so I think every 16% of the time the notes will be different. So that's that first sound, and obviously with the decay set there, it will sort of ring quite a lot. I can choke the sound, which means get rid of the decay and have it set to something a bit, you know, less washy. And I think during the piece I gradually increase the decay. It's quite a high sound. I can change the overall octaves on this mosaic quantizer, but I wanted it in that range for this particular piece. Let's move on to the next sound, which is a sort of droney bass. This is coming from the miniature synth from Dupfer, and let's just play it. So this is acting as a bass drone type thing, and it's set to a almost like 3 waveforms. It's got the sub, which is just that low one. It's also got 2 high ones, a sine wave and a bit of a pulse width square thing going on. I didn't actually pulse width modulate that. I could have done, and I mixed the two together to create. It's not a detuned sound, but it sounds a bit thicker than it normally would. And the sound for this one is coming from the actual 2 HP Turing machine, which is this little black one here. So it's very similar to the hemispheres, and this is one of the reasons I have them close together. If I want something that's a bit generative but not totally crazy, I use these Turing machines. So this one, the output of that, which is not quantized by the way, this 2 HP Turing machine, goes into another quantizer. In this case I use the other side of hemispheres to create a dual, I used the dual quantizer, and one of those, so you could have potentially 4 quantizers in hemispheres on ornamental prime, but I'm using just one side for a pentatonic C minor, which is then being quantized and then sent to the synthesizer voice. So that's really dependent on the settings on this Turing machine, and at the moment I've got it set on quite a low range. I'll actually increase it a bit. So now it's the bottom rotator here gives you more of a shut the cameras on here, more of a range of notes, and you can obviously to the left it's more bass sounds, to the right it will go up and down quite dramatically. And the next one up from that is the probability of a new note sounding, and I've got it set to about 60%-ish. Okay, so that's the CV. The actual trigger gate, if you like, which you can hear there kicking in, is coming from a similar thing to the previous sound, PAMS 3, which again is on a, let's just check this, very slow, oh yeah, divided by 7 clock on here, and again on a random waveform, so it will trigger every 7 pulses, 7 clocks if you like, and only then if the random waveform says yes, it's above a certain threshold. So that one is going into this second row of mult here, just to split it, because I wanted one to go to the mini synth itself, which is the one you're hearing, but I also wanted one obviously to trigger the Turing machine itself, so that's 2 required. And then because I had one left, I thought, why not, let's trigger over here the a bit of a bass drum sound. So when the when the trigger level is high enough, it will trigger a bass drum sound. Forget the hi-hat for the moment, but occasionally, I don't know if we'll get one now, you'll hear a bass drum trigger. The swelling type thing is because we didn't actually hear it there, but it's quite nice. It gives that sense of sometimes a kick will sound and on a long decay, and sometimes it won't, just to give some variation. The swelling effect you're hearing is because I'm modulating the FM filter of this mini synth here. So, and that's coming from an LFO quite close to it, an inverted LFO. This bottom yellow one is controlling that. So obviously the LFO modulation, just to make things interesting. So that's audio channel 3. The surface was on audio channels 1 and 2. Audio channel 4, slightly more sequency sound. So this sound is actually oscillator 1 of the TwinWaves dual oscillator. I do like modules that have, you know, more than one thing in them. So this has got 2 oscillators, I'm using both, and you can route them separately. So this is on a sort of sawtoothy sound, and audio wise it's going from the output of that into this filter, so I can control how mellow or how sharp the sound is, and obviously resonance as well. And you can hear it phasing in and out. That's because that same LFO that I was using to modulate the sort of bass drone sound, the positive side of the LFO, if you like, is controlling the filter of this one. So it's actually doing what I'm doing manually here, just opening it and closing it, just so that the sequence is not blasting away all the time. And the shape of the LFO here is a sort of triangle sawtooth cross, depending on where it's set there. If I just open the filter up, I can talk a little more about how this is being sequenced. You can also hear the reverb over here sort of kicking in and out, well, sort of phasing in and out with the other modulation. Anyway, to the sequencing. So where are we? Yeah, so we're on this top section here. So I'm using channel 1 of Bloom, which is a 2-channel sequencer. The CV, these green cables, I sometimes do this, if you notice all the yellow cables are for PAMs and hemispheres going into a mult and then sort of drifting down onto these two. And for this one I use these green cables. It sort of helps sometimes when I'm dissecting the patch a bit later. So the CV of this first sequence is obviously going into the voltage in, the CV in for oscillator 1. The output of oscillator 1, like I said, is going into this filter, and then this filter is routed, in this case, to audio channel 4. The gate for oscillator 1 here requires some shaping as well as filtering. Just take the modulation off a second, just so we can hear the sequence in a constant sequence, and then I can explain this bit. So we've now, sorry, I was talking about the gating of this sound. So there's a gate out from Bloom for track 1, which is going into this pip slope. I explained this in the other video, but this is like an ADSR type shaper, which allows me to make the sequence Let's turn the reverb off just for now. I can make the sequence very short, or the sound rather, or I can stretch out the tail and the decay. I can also change the attack, and so on. So that is being triggered from the sequencer, and then the output of the ADSR goes into the TwinWaves. That I've then modulated using this, but I'll leave it off for a second because in the particular piece I actually use some modulation going into Bloom because it's got a range of CV inputs for the variations. So this is slightly generative again. It's not, you know, all the way. We'll talk about random things in a minute. If I turn up the branches, it will now choose 3 more variations of that sequence. There's only a 3-step one. Let it play so you can hear it. If I turn the branches off, you just get the straight one, and occasionally you'll often see me changing the notes manually here. And also the step length. I think for the previous piece I had 5 steps. Wondering why that first note isn't sounding. I think it's because of the gating. Yeah. Sometimes if these gates are too long, when it triggers the pip slope, the ADSR, it doesn't send a separate trigger. So anyway, back to the branches. So there's a 5-step sequence. If I turn the branches on, I get an extra 5. If I turn it on considerably, I can get up to, you know, don't know how the maximum is. I think probably 16 or certainly 8. But I've also got a modulation. So this this very useful quad LFO here is sending out again a slow sine wave on number 4 to path, and what path is variations of the branches. So this is receiving, if you like, me turning the path. This is like the grouping. So a path has a group of 8 branches, and I think there's 4 paths, correct me if I'm wrong. So the LFO is effectively doing this, I don't know if you can see that, changing the path groupings, which then increases the complexity of this sequence dramatically. And the other thing I did to this sequence is, of course, did the old dotted 8th delay. So on this first FXL, AID-XL, which is again a Master Effects from this audio grouping, I had it creating that effect, and then put the modulation back in. There. So it goes from very mellow to inaudible on the filter, and then the filter opens, revealing the sequence. And that phasing in and out is very important for me in terms of creating that ambience. If I bring back the surface, just to show you this side. Whoops, I think I've hit the tuning on the surface by accident. I'll show you how I fix that. Sometimes if you hit a tuning knob, it can be a pain in the bum. So what I often do is fix a note using the quantizer. I can tell surface in this case just to play a C at all times. Likewise, I can tell, in this case, Bloom to just play a C. And they're supposed to be the same note. Just check with the And again, the note on the mini synth here could have potentially changed as well. So I'm just checking I'm not sure which is the truth note actually. That'll do for now. We'll fix it later. But that quickly, you know, entering the quantize notes to make sure things are in tune relative to each other, super important. So anyway, back to the sequence and surface. With the sequence on TwinWaves 1 down here, phasing in and out because of the modulation or filter. Right, and this will check the tuning. The next main sound, which I have quite a lot in patches, is the piano sound from this Disting EX. And this is very simple, pretty randomish, if you like, melody, tune, whatever you want to call it, because it's coming out of this random noise generator, or rather a random sample and hold. So I've got this CV coming from here into the tip-top quantizer, which again is tuned to whichever scale I fancy at any particular moment. At the moment it's a C minor-ish thing again. You know, I could, for example, just say play C and A flat, and I've got control over the octaves here, and that's going into the disting, which is being triggered from a probability gate on Steppy. I use Steppy all the time, literally everything. So on track C, this is a sequence. I'm hoping the camera can pick it up. You can see I just entered in some rather arbitrary notes because it doesn't matter too much, because I've got a probability of about 40 odd % of any of them playing. So it creates an effect like this, which is a piano tuned to, in this case, just the notes C and A flat, and being triggered pretty probabilistically. Add more notes. Obviously the quantizer is moving things up and down, so even if this random said, you know, play an F, if it's between A flat and C, it will choose the nearest one. And again, on a very slow clock, I don't know if you can see Steppy here, it's definitely going, or you can check actually, going like 4 times slower than normal clock. And that works very well with this sort of wash. I'll call this surface one the wash sound for the moment. So that's definitely in tune, so the sequence should be in tune as well. Not sure about the mini synth, we'll try it. Yeah, it's okay. So the thing that's making it obviously is the range of different chords that you get between a drone mini synth, which is changing notes. The surface is changing notes a bit faster, like almost a third of a bar faster. We've then got the piano, again listening to a different scale system. I'll add a B flat into the piano just so we've got some extra notes. And all of that going through a modulated reverb and a synchronized, oh sorry, I didn't mention that the delay itself is synchronized with PAMS 2, so there's what is the clock for 2? It's 1.3 times to create that dotted 8th effect. And we can start to hear those accidents that we want taking place now, as occasionally we'll get lovely rich major 7th chords springing out, and then it will drop back to like a G minor or something, and then to a C minor, and then suspended ones. and that's all sort of happening accidentally, and that's, you know, why we call it a, you know, generative patch, because the sounds will never be the same twice. At any moment it won't be the same as the next moment. Before I go on to the last couple of controls, let's just continue in order, because if I put chapter markers on this, it'll make sense. The other sound I've got is using TwinWaves 2 on a sine wave, so something very mellow, but quite fast on channel 2, the green channel of Bloom. And this has got some branches going again. Let's just turn the branches off for a second, just so we can hear the sequence I put in. Sound wise, like I said, it's a sine wave, audio going into this second filter I've got down here, this 2HP MMF, and so that goes in and it's coming out on channel 3 of this second mixer, which I've got panned to the left. And you can hear the filters also being modulated in a slightly different way. I'm using PAM's PAM clock 5 in this case, to send a random waveform to the frequency. So you're hearing, instead of it going sort of phasing in and out, you're actually hearing it, you know, go filter off quite high, middle, high, off. So it's a rather random opening of the filter, which is the effect I wanted. I didn't want too many things just sort of flowing in and out. And you can hear it happening there, kind of off. I'll open it a bit so we can hear it all the time. Off quite a lot there. And then quite loud. This is just the filter opening and closing. And then almost at the extreme, and then it may go off 20 seconds, it may stay quite loud for 20 seconds, which it is at the moment. So because it's random, it'll just, let's wait for it to find, there we go. I didn't touch anything, it just turned itself off. So that's very cool, just sending random waveforms to modulation inputs. I sometimes send a PAM's random waveform into some of these effects units at times to create quite weird effects. These two sequences together work quite well, because we've got the channel, these are both TwinWave sounds, so the first channel, and I did pan them, so one of them's on the, the right speaker, the other on the left. One's doing a nice phasing in and out, the other one is doing a slightly random phasing in and out. I've got quite a bit of resonance on the TwinWaves 2, this sine wave. And those two sounds provide a nice sense of movement to the piece. Without those, the whole thing is quite slow. So let's just turn up surface. Let's call that the wash sound. We'll turn up the piano, which is like a decorative, providing these interesting chordal notes. We'll turn up the drone. So those sounds, those three types of sounds, are not providing any real forward movement, so this is great to drop back to. And I could actually talk about, sometimes if I want to drop back to something quite sparse, I will often introduce this U-burst effect by freezing a particular sound. So it's going to sample about a second and a half of that. That green button now means it's frozen, and I can actually fade from these mixers here to just the frozen part inside here, which is like a sample, short sample, which is then granulated, sliced and diced into sections, and allows me to move this position across the slices, if you like, slices of sound. But to do that anyway, I've actually got another LFO controlling the position. So this LFO 3 here is moving the position backwards and forwards across that slice. What this allows me to do is, from that quite static, almost like sounds like an organ chord or something, I can reintroduce parts down here. So let's, for example, reintroduce the sequence parts. You won't hear them because the balance is purely on this granulator. And now when I bring the balance of this back into the mix, suddenly we've got those two sequences playing. We've killed the frozen part. Likewise, I can freeze the bits with the sequences running. I can press freeze here, press freeze, and then likewise move the balance to the frozen element. And you'll hear a bit more of the positional panning now because the sequence was in there, and there's a few more discrete notes sticking out, which is what you're hearing there. I'm going to put position in the middle and it will oscillate around it. And again, I can use this, I can drop back on the actual mix, which is down here. Let's get rid of all the long soft sounds, and we'll just keep in the sequencer sounds. So when I go back now, all we're going to have is the faster moving sounds and none of the washes and things. Increase the branches on sound 2. The branches for channel 1 here, you can hear go very high pitched at times, and that's mainly because I'm modulating the path, and one of the paths I think takes the sequence quite high, and if I just want to kill that occasionally and just have it sitting in a nice space. Oh, saying that, we just got a high note again. So one of those branches is quite high. Oh no, it's actually coming from, correction, it's coming from TwinWaves 2, so let's just check that channel. I'm just going to play TwinWaves 2 sequence only, just to see what it's actually doing. Oh, it's because we got a high note in the sequence here, which is probably when I was fiddling with it during the performance. I'm going to drop that down a bit. And it's got no branches on now. And again, we're getting the random filtering, so it sort of dropped out temporarily. Bring the branches back in. And I can probably put the path modulation... Oh no, it's still there. Right, I'll fiddle with that. Yeah, it's definitely coming from there. And I think... Oh, I know what's happening. It's... Sorry, stupid me. I turned the resonance up quite high just to demonstrate something before and didn't turn it back down. What an idiot. So that's a bit more mellow. Bring back the channel 1. That's what we're after. Right, the other one sound I've got here is... I don't think I actually turned this very loud on the recording yesterday. Is from Drum 2, Erica Simp's Pico Drum 2. It's a sort of clave sound being triggered from Steppy track A. Again, this is just like 4 to the floor, but I've got it on a probability of, again, 40-something%. So it only plays occasionally. Speaking of percussion, let's get rid of everything apart from percussive type sounds. As well as the bass drum up here, I've also got a hi-hat sound being triggered by, I think, channel 2, B of Steppy. Just sort of 8s rather, because of the clock speed, with a probability of 30%-ish. So that sounds like this. So that hi-hat is 8s playing roughly 30% of the time, randomly choosing which ones. Turn the reverb down a bit. And we'll occasionally get the bass drum coming, as we said, from the beginning, from this random waveform trigger from PAMS, I can't remember which one, PAMS 3. Still haven't heard it. I heard it earlier, but so trust me, it's there. So that's a bit of percussion with the sequences, with the piano, with the surface wash, now with the drone. Let's balance it up a bit, turn the clave sound down. The like the hi-hat sound only goes through the reverb and this looper, which I'm not using the looper, and the burst, so it needs a bit of reverb on it. It sounds a bit dry. I can control the hi-hat, make it decay a bit longer. Right. I'll finish there. I'll just let it play. Let it play itself out. Oh, thank you. Some coffee just out. Let it play itself out. Just bring that hi-hat back. I'm not sure what I did there. There we go. Just to let you hear it working, so I'll turn the branches up for both channels on this. Make sure everything is audible, and then I'll just let it play for 5 minutes so you can hear it. I might fiddle, of course. Right, thanks for that. Any questions in the comments below, and then like and subscribe. Yeah, all that stuff. So see you next time.